This is Indian Country Today.
Eskwili Kata'a. Thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Here are the headlines for Tuesday, November 17th. The Trump administration is rushing to open up drilling in Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. The administration is allowing oil and gas industries to pick areas for drilling in the pristine wilderness. The rush is to lock in drilling rights before President-elect Joe Biden takes office. The call for nominations starts today for the Federal Register. This allows companies to identify areas for an upcoming lease sale on 1.6 million acres in the Arctic Refuge. The Interior Department aims to hold the sale before Biden takes the oath of office in January. President Donald Trump has opened public lands to logging, mining, and grazing. In 2017, the Republican-controlled Congress authorized drilling in the refuge, which is home to polar bears. The Bureau of Land Management in Alaska said the push brings them one step closer to holding an historic first coastal plain lease sale. The administration is pushing ahead with other energy development projects and is scaling back federal environmental rules. The chairman of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, Cedric Cromwell, is pleading not guilty in connection to a bribery scheme. Cromwell is accused of using his tribal chairman position to extort thousands of dollars in bribes. The tribe is located in Massachusetts, and between 2014 and 2017, prosecutors say Cromwell was provided with payments and other benefits valued at nearly $60,000. The alleged bribes are said to be in exchange for nearly $5 million in construction contracts with the tribe. He also faces an extortion charge and has also pleaded not guilty. A Boston federal court judge released him on a $25,000 bond until his court date in December. Tribal leaders in New Mexico will meet virtually with the state's governor today to discuss the issues plaguing their nations. The tribal population in New Mexico is made up of 19 Pueblo nations, 3 Apache nations, and part of the Navajo Nation. Yesterday, in a rare media appearance, 2 Pueblo governors from San Felipe and Acoma joined the state's Secretary of Indian Affairs to discuss the event, which is closed to the media.
We are in the midst of a pandemic. In New Mexico, our tribal communities have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. At the beginning of the pandemic, almost 60% of the cases were American Indian and Alaskan Native. And this summit provides an opportunity for the state and the 23 sovereign nations to come together.
The day-long summit will largely include the impact of the coronavirus on health, education, and the economy. And one tribal business there is closing for a second time this year due to COVID-19. The Isleta Resort and Casino south of Albuquerque is being forced to close again due to the COVID-19 surge in that state. This closing also includes all of their resort properties as a temporary precaution to the coronavirus. Isleta Pueblo Governor Max Zuni says he encourages everyone to stay home to help flatten the curve. Zuni also says the resort and casino has been an industry leader in establishing COVID-safe training programs. The casino first closed to the public in March due to the pandemic and reopened 3 months later in mid-June. And in South Dakota, as hospitals continue to fill up, the state's COVID-19 death rates are telling. Before November 1st, the state reported 425 deaths due to COVID-19. And since the 1st of November, 215 people have died due to COVID, a dramatic rise in deaths there. Hundreds of thousands of people attended the Sturgis motorcycle rally in the state this summer. Rally-goers linked to thousands of cases were undeterred by the tribes who locked down their roads to avoid the possibility of infection. South Dakota also declined to cancel the state fair, which still does not have a mask mandate in place. According to the New York Times, South Dakota has more than 160 COVID-19 cases per 100,000, which is second in the nation as of November 16th. The Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, which is located in that state, is enacting its own strict coronavirus lockdown. Inez Per-Citizen will lead the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons program in Washington state. The appointment of David Rogers is part of the U.S. Justice Department's effort for missing and murdered Indigenous people. Rogers previously served as his tribe's police chief, and he is also a consultant involved in the training of tribal police around the country. Rogers will work with the state's nearly 30 tribal communities, and he will also work with multiple agencies to develop protocols for responding to reports of missing or murdered Indigenous people. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today for Tuesday, November 17th. I'm Patty Thalahungva. When we come back, a new family drama centered around Native Americans is coming to NBC. We'll hear about that and more from Bird Runningwater. For nearly 20 years, Bird Runningwater has worked with the Sundance Institute as the director of the Institute's Indigenous Filmmakers program. He also co-leads the outreach and inclusion work at Sundance. During his time there, he's helped 140 Indigenous artists. And now he's taking a co-executive producer role for a new series called Sovereign, which is in development for NBC. Welcome, Bird.
Hi, Patty. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. It's very exciting having you work on this new TV series, and it's the first family drama centered around Native Americans. What can you tell us about Sovereign?
Well, it's actually, the first drama for network television. Interestingly, there is a significant movement happening with Native television right now. There's one show that is currently shooting for the Peacock platform, which is being show run by our first Indigenous showrunner, Sierra Ornelas, and she's Navajo. And then Sterling Harjo and Taika Waititi just shot a pilot, for their half-hour dramedy for the FX network. So, there's two other shows that are in movement. And so our show, is basically an hour-long family drama for network television that is currently in development, which basically means it's deep in the writing stages, it's deep in the definition stages, and it's going to be something I think that's going to be really exciting.
And it pairs you with people you've worked with at Sundance, right?
It has, yeah. And interestingly, two of those people, one is Shaz Bennett. I knew her from the time when I first moved to LA, just through kind of the general filmmaking community. And then the second person is Shaz Bennett. I'm sorry, Shaz Bennett's the first one, Sydney Freeland, the second one. And she is a filmmaker who came through the Indigenous program, our feature film program, had two films that premiered at Sundance. So yeah, I do know them.
Well, that's got to be kind of exciting to be able to work with an Indigenous crew.
I think so. If we make it to the point of production, it's kind of like right now, it's like we're in the percolating stages with Ava, and with our two co-creators. Basically, Shaz and Sydney are the writers on the show. And so they're kind of defining the world through their writing right now.
And it is based, you mentioned Ava, it's based on a story that Ava DuVernay actually wrote. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with her?
Well, I know Ava. I've known Ava probably for more than 15 years, going back to her early years working in Hollywood as a Hollywood publicist. And she was actually reminding me that she was a publicist on a Native directed documentary at the 1999 Sundance Film Festival, which was even before my time at Sundance. But yeah, so it's been really interesting and exciting to kind of watch her pivot from this career of working the insides and outs of Hollywood publicity, for film and television, to go into being, a storyteller herself as a writer and as a director. And she was one of I think probably the first Black woman to ever win the Director's Prize at Sundance Film Festival for her first feature.
Wow. And isn't that interesting? I mean, you've been at Sundance now 20 years. What can you tell us about, what was the scene like when you first got to Sundance in terms of Native produced media, and what's the scene now today?
Well, it's grown by leaps and bounds. And I've been at Sundance during kind of some really interesting phases. One is when I first came on board, the program was primarily US focused, but I knew that there was other significant work happening internationally with other Indigenous communities who had a national profile within their own countries. And I felt like, you know, as far as our comparison with other international countries like Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, you know, the US is woefully far behind. So my first effort was to try to internationalize our work and to try to create connections between our Indigenous communities working, you know, in filmmaking. And so it's like, I feel really proud of the global Indigenous film community that we've really been able to nurture and to support and build. And so when you look at those factors, I think now at this point, 20 years later, you know, it's like there are more Indigenous people working in filmmaking than there ever have been in the history, you know, I think, of storytelling. And it's really exciting. And it's also interesting to kind of see the high volume of production, which is something that didn't really happen, you know, probably 20 years ago. So now there's more films being made than ever before.
Well, also technology has changed quite a bit. You know, 20 years ago, it took a lot of money to produce even a short film. And today, if you have a smartphone, you've got a studio, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of one of the other second things that I've been a part of while I've been at Sundance is the whole kind of like digital transformation of filmmaking. You know, before, when it was celluloid and analog and, like you said, so expensive, and now everything has been digitized. And also, if you think about the current generation that we're now really kind of seeding and developing, you know, who are kind of in the 18 to 25-year-old range, it's like they've all grown up with the internet, they've all grown up with cell phones, they've all grown up with all these digital tools, which previous generations never had before. So they're much more fluent, you know, in a lot of the digital technology.
That's got to be exciting to see that, because there are so many talented Native Americans, you know, storytellers, shooters, and editors, photographers, to really see their stories coming together. And so as you make your selection each year for Sundance, what kind of storyline have you seen change through the years? Or what can you tell us about, you know, just what has been submitted for Sundance?
Yeah. Well, you know, that's a really difficult question to answer so concisely. But one of the things I will say is that, you know, we're seeing kind of a really broad explosion of a lot of different storylines into what I would call kind of genre filmmaking, whether kind of like futuristic styles of storytelling, or maybe horror genres or thriller genres, as opposed to kind of straight drama, social, you know, kind of social realistic drama. And one of the things that I think is always going to be kind of a part of the menu of Indigenous storytelling is this burden that so many of our filmmakers carry, which is like to have to try to undo and kind of deconstruct all of the historical misrepresentation that has happened to us, you know, in the history of cinema and the history of television. And most of America doesn't even know that they've been misfed, you know, inaccuracy. And so we have to not only try to create something authentic and original and new, it's like we're also trying to undo all of these decades of kind of harmful representation of us.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions about Indians is that we're stoic and so serious, right? So what have been the humorous pitches and movie plots that have come through Sundance?
Well, I mean, I think one of the people, Indigenous filmmakers, I think, who's really succeeded kind of, you know, in the comedic realm is Taika Waititi from New Zealand. You know, it's like comedy is at the core of his work. You know, he's known for his comedy. That's the center of his voice, you know, as an artist. And so, you know, and other people I think who've done really well in comedy are like Sterling Harjo. You know, he's one of those people who really, they call it dramedy, somebody who really blends good drama with really good comedy and comedic moments. And so that's a particular skill. It's very hard to do.
Sterling is just brilliant at that, because he has you laughing so hard and then all of a sudden you start crying, because his messages are just like so intense. His storyline is so intense, but really wonderful. Now, you mentioned Taika a couple of times. Your job has taken you around the world. What are some of the highlights of your 20 years of working with Sundance and traveling around the world to Indigenous communities and finding these filmmakers?
Well, I think you just said it. It's like I have such a great privilege of being able to travel to so many different countries around the world and to visit Indigenous communities around the world and to be welcomed by them and to be fed by them. And like I gave the opening keynote speech a few years ago at the Indigenous Film Conference in the Arctic Circle in Norway, where on the Sami side of the Arctic Circle, where the Indigenous Sami people are. And, I can't count the numbers of times that I've been to New Zealand. I mean, when you're going to New Zealand and you're going to like weddings and funerals, it's like, that you're in really deep with the community. And so that's New Zealand for me. But then, it's like just hitting all these amazing territories. We were just actually prior to the pandemic, we were just launching our efforts to support Latin American Indigenous filmmakers in South America. We were pulling together artists from across these different countries in the Andean region. We were all brushing up on our Spanish. We are bringing Indigenous filmmakers to show their work, and we had to pull the plug, thanks to the pandemic, sadly. But, we've been learning how to deliver so many more of our efforts and programs, online through Zoom and other platforms. So the work continues despite the pandemic.
Yes, isn't that interesting? I mean, did you ever think you'd be living through a pandemic?
No, and I don't know if I ever want to again either.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is something you read about in the history books, and now, here we are. So what's our story from our pandemic experience for our future generations?
Yeah, but I think it's also, it's a really interesting test of time. It's like I know so many of my Indigenous artist community have really hunkered down and have been using this downtime, to really write. So many people are writing so much more. Production cultures have kind of ceased, except for some of the Hollywood, where they're really implementing really strong safety measures, to be able to produce television and films. And so, we'll see how things pick back up. But I am enjoying kind of some of the downtime and not being on airplanes.
Well, one thing that you're deep into, or you're starting to get deep into right now, is looking at the Oscars. You're a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Science, and you were inducted in 2019. So give us a timeline right now, and looking forward to the Academy Awards when they are handed out in 2021.
Yeah, well, I mean, during a non-pandemic year, we would have had, this full year of theatrical releases of films, for films to qualify for Oscar submission and consideration. But, as since March, we haven't really had any kinds of theatrical releases going on. So anyway, but I belong to a branch which is called the Members at Large branch, which is kind of a catch-all branch. It's not a craft-rooted branch, like directors and screenwriters and producers and cinematographers and, costume designers and all of the more craft-focused kind of branches. But, we all are at this phase right now where I do know that the Oscars have been pushed, I believe, until April. So right now there's a lot of, beginning work where, and they even adjusted kind of qualification rules for a lot of the films that could be submitted and considered for awards. So there's a lot of adjustments, as many of us are making, in so many of our processes in daily lives. But basically what will happen is, we'll be getting all of these, DVDs. There's an online platform, where you can go in, you can look at work, you can observe work. And all the different branches will be nominating from their branches who they want their nominees to be. And eventually we'll reach a slate of nominees to where, you receive a ballot and you vote. And, I got to go to the awards this past March, to watch Taika win his Oscar award, but I don't know who knows how the show's going to be handled in the future.
Well, regardless, the show must go on.
It must go on, yes.
All right. Well, Bird Runningwater, the director of the Indigenous Filmmakers Program at the Sundance Institute, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's such an honor.
And we'll be right back. First, it was a critical service that ended this summer at the Phoenix Indian Medical Center. The OBGYN department shut down. And now we're following the story of another IHS facility in New Mexico that is shutting down some critical services. Dalton Walker is our national correspondent, and he's covering both stories. He joins us now to give us an update. Welcome, Dalton.
Bonjour, Patty. Miigwech for having me.
Absolutely. So this has just been a wild couple of months when it comes to IHS facilities, again, both in Phoenix and in New Mexico. What can you tell us about this facility that's centered in the Pueblo of Acoma?
On Friday, we got notice from the Acoma Pueblo regarding its service unit. There was some closure to a lot of key services it provides. And on Monday, we learned more about the closures. Acoma Pueblo Governor Brian Vile held a news conference, and later in the day, Indian Health Service held a news conference to explain what happened on their end. And it included IHS Director Michael Wiaki, which is a pretty big deal when you have the top person in IHS come out to explain what's going on. Basically, the hospital in Acoma has cut back on a lot of its key services. It was a hospital that provided a lot of services to not only citizens of the Pueblo there, but other Pueblo citizens and even Navajo people along that Interstate 40 corridor. And now basically hours have been cut and services have been pulled back. And we found out Monday that it's related to one of the hospitals that is part of, or one of the tribal nations, a part of it, the Laguna. They pulled back some of the funding that's allocated for them from IHS for health care to dedicate to a facility in Laguna.
And those two pueblos are pretty close together, Acoma and Laguna Pueblo. But still, does that clear up the reasons why the IHS facility then shut down all of these critical services there? Because now that's forcing the people to drive into Albuquerque, which is about an hour away or so.
Yes, it especially in the COVID-19 pandemic, Governor Vile stressed how the coronavirus has affected his community, and increase of cases have been coming up in November compared to past months. So that's a big part of it too. And then at the same time, these services that were critical to the tribe are no longer offered. There's still urgent care available, but the hours, like I mentioned, are pulled back regarding the type of services. But yes, if you have an emergency or something that's severe, when you had this place very close, now you either have to head up the road to a smaller county clinic or either up to Albuquerque, which is roughly 60 miles away from the Pueblo.
Governor Brian Vile from Acoma Pueblo was pretty harsh in his commentation, talking about the closure of the hospital, and said, IHS basically dropped the ball here. When IHS spoke later in the day, did they have any kind of plan to reinstate these services at some point in time, or they're just saying they're totally canceled and people will just have to go to, Albuquerque?
The governor mentioned that he had little contact and little talk with IHS regarding what happened and what happened. Wiaki said that they've been in contact with the governor's office regarding what was going to happen regarding pullback and hours changed. And the governor does have a lot of support. He had the state governor, Michelle Grisham, come out, and then even U.S. Senator Tom Udall and U.S. Rep. Deb Haaland each come out in his defense, wondering why this happened now and basically questioning IHS for this decision.
Yes, and also one of his allegations was that IHS did not even notify the congressional delegation about this closure. Again, that would impact so many people and put so many people in a hardship situation, because many people have a hard time getting to Albuquerque because of lack of transportation.
Exactly. And what we don't know regarding Will the emergency services ever come back to this specific hospital? That's still not been determined. Wiyaki mentioned that there's some type of plan strategy that they're working on to figure out what type of services will be provided at the hospital and even what's going to be provided at the Laguna service unit once that opens next year.
And so is it totally closed now? Is all the services have stopped today, or did that take effect on Friday?
The Pueblo governor, Vayo, explained that it was closed, but Wiyaki's said it's not fully closed. It does offer limited urgent care needs, and it is open only for parts of the day currently, from my understanding.
What's the update with the Phoenix Indian Medical Center? Did Rear Admiral Wiyaki address that?
Monday's talk was really heavy on the Pueblo hospital. A lot of people were on the call. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to ask Wiyaki regarding the PIMC facility, and we'll continue to follow the story out of Arizona.
Dalton Walker, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. Your life is precious. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Join us again tomorrow.
You got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
Indian Country Today is recorded at the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center in Phoenix, Arizona.
This is Indian Country Today.